the price of memory is going to come down so sharply that most of the important data in the world is going to reside in memory.
Can India really build product for the world?
We're very, very, very bullish about the Indian market per se. It's the fourth largest economy in the world, 3.1, 3.2 trillion, and on the ascent, right? This is probably going to be the next $10 trillion market. A friend of mine was talking about the auto rickshaw guy not taking cash. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happening here.
What is the current state of database market right now with AI's influence? How is Singlestore positioning in that area?
The database market's a $120 billion market, right? And it's growing between 11-17% every year. So one of the biggest markets. It's appalling when you see the suicide rates in female teenagers in the last decade has gone up 300%. I literally went to 88 MG Road to Wipro because I'd failed the interview when they came to campus and almost bullied my way to getting a job selling PCs and printers and loved it.
Welcome, Raj. We are excited to have you today. So what's with the name Singlestore? I hear like there's a history behind renaming the company from what it is today, and it's been 4 years with the company. Could you share the history in terms of what the brand change did, and is there any anecdote behind
There always is a story behind every rebranding. By the way, it's nice to be here and thanks for having me. It's great to be back in India. I haven't been back in 15 years almost, and this is the city that I grew up in, so very, very fond memories this morning. Singlestore, we started as MemSQL. So essentially the entire premise was that we were an in-memory SQL database where we thought that the price of memory is going to come down so sharply that most of the important data in the world is going to reside in memory. That naturally didn't quite pan out the way we expected it to pan out. And so I hate to use the term, we pivoted and we really then developed a 3-tier architecture, which is memory, disk, and of course, over time, object store. So we keep the hot data in memory, and as the data cools down, it goes to disk and ultimately to object store, which allows you to have unit economics that are best in class. So the fastest database empirically, also the best TCO available for a general purpose database. So that was the entire concept of the product. However, as the product had evolved, the name hadn't changed. So the name was essentially telling our customers, and more importantly, their prospects, that this is an in-memory SQL. Now, the SQL part, we don't mind that much, but the in-memory always has a connotation, which is it's very expensive. It's a built-for-purpose database. And we were not that. We are a general-purpose database. We have a unique storage architecture, so we are not really an in-memory database of sorts, or only an in-memory database. And really, the uniqueness of the database is the fact that not only do we have the 3-tier storage architecture, which is awesome, but we are also a row store where you can write application and reason with that application through our column store. And the ability for you to start writing an application without worrying about whether that data is in row or columnar store was a feature which was called Singlestore, right? So it was a feature. Now we call it universal storage. And I just loved that feature so much, and we really thought that that was what spoke to our mission, vision, and purpose as a company. A single store for your data. And that's why we kind of branded it as Singlestore. Of course, we didn't have too much money. We hadn't even raised our Series E, so we had to do it on a shoestring budget. And I remember it was 3 names that we had shortlisted. And this was a Friday, and I was going to take 2 days to think about the one that I liked and come back on Monday and say, all right, this is what we are going to talk about. And I remember distinctly, I think it was Saturday night, I was preparing for bed, so finished brushing my teeth, and I was like, something doesn't seem right about these 3 names. It doesn't speak to me. And then I was like, what do we want to be called? It's a single store for data. I'm like, wow, that's Singlestore. That's a feature. And I remember texting a few of my colleagues, and they're like, but that's a feature. I said, yeah, but think about this. And then it developed. And Monday morning, I went and said, well, yeah, these 3 names are good, but I have another name. And everyone went, oh God, here we go again. But yeah, it's single store, and the rest is history.
And coming to the India's landscape, right? So I'll come to the competition later. But in terms of India, right, there is several narrative that is running at the moment. So one is that India is a backdoor, like a back office kind of a narrative, and the second is more towards India is like the use case capital, and the third is more towards can India really build product for the world, right? And you've started an acceleration program as well for this.
We're very, very, very bullish about the Indian market per se. And I mean, actually, being Indian, I've always had a soft corner
Yeah.
for India. But keeping that aside, I do think that there are a few things that are going for India. Right. First, from a fundamental perspective, one is 1.4 billion people, 350 million plus under the age of 60. So that is in and by itself a huge benefit, right? The second is the number of engineers that come out every year, year after year, from India are mind blowing, right? They just dwarf every other country in the world. The fact that just Indians as a community or a country understand math and analytics is just a huge positive. English being the spoken language, huge positive. For the most part, a very fair judiciary, which is really, really important for multinational firms, right? And now a building ecosystem of VCs, etc., where there is availability of money for startups to happen, like you and I were talking about the Bangalore startup scene.
Okay.
Now, the three things that you spoke about, one was the cost arbitrage, really the back office of the world. That was a narrative, Jack Welch, mid 90s, and it's still true to some extent. You can have accounts receivable in India. You can have expense report, but that's not what makes India interesting. You can do it in you can do it in Philippines, you can do it in other countries. That's not the uniqueness for us, at least, right? The uniqueness for us is in the quality of talent, right? The work ethic. And also now there are companies in India which have scale to be able to harden the products that are built by Indian startups. It's the fourth largest economy in the world, 3.1, 3.2 trillion, and on the ascent, right? This is probably going to be the next $10 trillion market, right? So I do think that there are companies now, Freshworks being one example, the Dhrova being another example, Unifor being the third example, where companies that are incubated and started in India are taking global stage. All right. And the product quality is good enough for the global stage. The entrepreneurs are global citizens who can take the company and take it from an India incubated to the world stage, while still maintaining very, very strong roots in India. You typically gravitate from a database standpoint to a open source because it is quote unquote free. Open source, as I've always said, is free, not like me buying you a beer or a cup of coffee, which is kind of free. It's free like me giving you a puppy, all right?
Totally.
Like in my golf course, there is a sign, if you find your kids wandering, we'll give them an espresso and a puppy. So the fact really is, open source is sort of free like a puppy, right? You have to maintain it. You have to train it, and over time it gets very expensive. What we want to do is most startups gravitate to open source from a cost perspective. If they could, they would want to get started with us. All right. So we are reducing the barrier of entry for startups to be able to use us. And now we have a program where you can actually use us for free. So you do not have to then re-platform 2, 3, 4 years later. You can be on that journey and save yourself that trouble. So I'm very, very excited about that program. And I'll report back. Let's see what the uptake is of that program. But it's something that I'm extremely, extremely excited about.
That's pretty interesting, Raj. So on the kind of startups you are looking to incubate, right, or accelerate, So you told me that you'll be giving free infrastructure, data infrastructure for them to start and get to the market really faster, and that's a amazing thing to be doing there. So what are some of the success metric, or how are you selecting these startups? What are you looking at in these startups in terms of the alignment with the company as well as the market? Is there any particular metric or success metric that you're looking for these startups and how they can scale?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting side when you meet a startup, right? I mean, it's more the bet on the entrepreneurs that you make rather than on the idea by itself.
Okay.
Most of the startups don't ultimately become big with the idea that they started off chasing, right?
Correct.
They sort of either pivot or evolve. Is probably the term that you use. It's actually not that much the sort of startups that we want to back, and we are not VCs, so we aren't going to be squinting at an entrepreneur and seeing if they're going to be successful or not. I think for us, the criteria is to offer intellectually honest advice to the entrepreneurs to say, hey, for your sort of an idea, we might not be the right platform, right? However, for this sort of an idea, we would be the perfect platform. So, what is that idea, or what is that sort of product genre of sorts that we fit in very well into? And that is more if you are in a developing an application or a service where you require millisecond latency or speed, right? Single digit millisecond latency at petabyte scale, right? And multi-model workloads. If those are the three tenets that power your app, your service, your value proposition, then we are the ideal platform. However, if your app requires extreme degree of transactional fidelity, which means an indelible signature of your transaction, speed is not important, the data is not that large, and the data types aren't as varied, then we probably aren't the platform for you. How would we deem it successful? Naturally, adoption is probably the one metric, single activation metric that we would have. We would also love to see some of these scale and prove out that they didn't have to change platforms as they grew from pre-revenue onto $100 million plus. Of course, that's going to take time. But over time, that will be one metric. And also getting the developer mindshare. Of the 30 million developers in the world, between 6 and 9 million are in India. So it is a huge home for developers.
Interesting. And what about the strategic, is there something for Singlestore in it in terms of they also upgrading the feature or product with these investments?
I do think that the more usage that you have of your product in a wider ecosystem, it hardens your product that much more. It basically has people request features which help them, which makes our product, in return really good. We are for profit, naturally, so this is not only a philanthropic venture. Ultimately, we'll be judged by, what money we make for our ecosystem of investors, employees, and partners. We do feel that as the developer ecosystem thrives, the bet that we are making, Amit, is, as they say, the easiest way to kill a bad product is to advertise it.
Got it.
All right. However, if you do have a great product, which we believe we do, we feel that we have an immensely differentiated product, especially for the genre of applications that I mentioned. Then the hypothesis is if we can put it in the hands of enough developers, all right, which are trying to solve for that problem, they are going to be really happy with us. And as they're happy with us, they're going to use us, they're going to recommend us to their friends and colleagues and developers. And that is the virality of sorts that we are looking for.
And I think 2 years back, you had mentioned that the database market is about 110 billion sort of thing, and everyone has a piece of the pie in that share. And the market also is like cluttered at the moment. You have cloud providers, you have database providers like, you have Snowflake, you have Databricks, and also database like Redis, all are catching up into get that share of the market pie. Previously, it was mostly inferencing. Now it is training, and database players are coming with various innovation in terms of networking, architect, and the strategies also are changing. So, what is the current state of database market right now with AI's influence, and how is single store positioning in that area?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as you said, the database market's a $120 billion market,
Alright.
right? And it's growing between 11 17% every year. So, one of the biggest markets that you have in enterprise software by a country mile, right? Of the $120 billion, if you were to add all the modern day database players, modern day being post 2008, so Mongo, you said Databricks, Elastic, us, all the vendors, right? The combined revenue will not pass 7 to $10 billion.
Okay.
So really, $110 billion of data is residing on incumbent databases.
Correct.
Right? Now, let's just say 30 billion of that has a very long tail, right? ATM, backend, and all the rest of it, which will probably take 10 years to move.
Correct.
But 80 billion or of data will leave the incumbency and move to a modern day database.
Absolutely.
Let's just say there are two or three $10 billion plus companies, AWS and SQL Server and all the rest. But there are $50 billion of incumbent databases that will get modernized. So in theory, there are going to be 50 $1 billion database companies over the course of the next 3 to 7 to 10 years, right?
Yes.
Of course, that's not the case. However, as I often joke with analysts, that I don't wake up every morning and say, well, I want to be the 13th best database company in the world. But even if I was to be the 13th best database company in the world, it's a multi-billion dollar value proposition, right? The second bit is, you hear a lot that it's a crowded market and all the rest of it. The reason that we are extremely vocal about what our ARR is, what our cloud is, what the others thing is, anyone talk is cheap, all right? However, you got to back that up by saying, how well are you doing, right? And one of that metric is, how well is your adoption? How well is your ARR? How well is your growth rate? How well is your entire cloud strategy actually panning out, right? 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we had zero cloud business. Today, more than 45% of our business is in the cloud, which is growing at 47% year on year. These are metrics, right? And we've got $170 million in the bank, right? We burn probably less than $25 million a year. We'll be cash flow break even in the next 27 months. So those are metrics which say not only are we a innovative, interesting technology, but we are also now a sustainable business that you can bet your business on. So that's an important part. I do believe that most modern CIOs do not want to be locked in at the cloud layer and the data layer with one cloud provider. So they do want a cloud agnostic data strategy that's where we, Databricks, Snowflake, Mongo come in, apart from this cloud database providers. This market with AI is sort of the last mile, Amit, right? I mean, there's a lot of hype about AI and for the right reasons. However, you do not have AI without a hygienic, robust, agile data estate. If you have data federated in 35 different data stores, you are never going to have millisecond response time at petabyte scales with multi-model workloads, right? And without speed at scale, there is no AI.
Yeah.
All right. So this AI revolution, as you may call it, is like the gold rush in California, right? And most of it was not only the gold miners who made money, but it was also the pickaxe suppliers, the apparel, Levi's, that made tons and tons of money. So in this AI phenomenon, I do believe that we are the foundational tenets of this essential evolution in technology. It is going to be the very bones of your database on which you've built these foundational models for AI. You brought about Redis, and I don't bag competitors at all. Redis is not a competitor. We never meet them. They are a caching layer for the most part. They're open source. They're having their own challenges with the fork with AWS. We wish them well. They also have harbor similar ambitions like we do to be a general purpose database. They are $100 million plus for sure. They will be in that cohort of global 20 database providers. So yeah.
And also, when it comes to, I think these days you get to hear a lot of this vector search feature being integrated into the database with the AI layer, right? So, do you think it's like a band-aid solution for most database company? Whereas you mentioned about the foundation, right? So that I think Singlestore has got from a very early on, and vector search has been part of the service. It's like one of the features long back, I think 2017 onwards.
That's right.
And also, I hear that in next 2 to 3 years, maybe vector search might be redundant. Or what is your take on this? Like in terms of the craze that is happening with enterprise using RAG, we just mentioned. What is your take on that? The entire that hype you spoke about. What will happen in the next 2 to 3 years? What are your expectations?
Yeah, I don't think vector indices and hybrid search is a hype. I think
it.
if you effectively need to build modern day applications, you have to have that functionality.
Got it.
I think there are two schools of thought, right? One essentially says that you've got whatever 10, 20, 30 databases or whatever 5, 6, 10 databases. And to do RAG or build AI applications, you require a vector only database like Pinecone or Milvus or Vespa or what have you, right? We disagree with that essential school of thought. We think that the incumbent databases that you have, the 3, 5, 7, 10, will have comparable functionality over a period of time, and I mean 9 to 12 months, that vector-only databases had, right? So Pinecone 2 years ago was probably 9 months ahead of where we are with our vector weaver, right? So yeah, they did leapfrog us because they were a specialty database. However, a year into, when they came up on the renewal cycles, everyone took a look and said, we've got 80% of the functionality in our incumbent database, whether it's Mongo or us or X, Y, or Z. And they're like, we don't need a specialty database to manage our vectors, right?
Okay.
And that's why Pinecone sort of, is where Pinecone is. We stick by that I do not think that you need to further complicate your data estate by having a specialized vector layer, a vector database layer, to jump into the AI foray, for example. So that's the big part. We've been doing vectors, like you said, since 2017. We have just released or earlier this year, the vector indices, the hybrid search, and we do believe that just on that RAG capabilities, we are best in class, right? Now, you got to understand that the consolidated stack that you get from RAG down to all the database features that you would need uncomplicates your data estate. And remember, the one thing that's very important with AI is scale. And only simplicity scales. Complexity doesn't scale.
Yeah.
Right? And complexity is when you add swim lane databases and have federated data estates. I mean, look what happened to Delta.
Yeah.
Right? They are blaming Microsoft on it, but Microsoft's actually right in saying you got antiquated tech. Whether they're right or wrong, I'm not taking a position. But their IT stack is arguably complicated. All right. So when something goes wrong, for them to unravel that thing is just, or solve that thing is almost impossible, right? Right now, there's a lot of talk about the pointy end of the spear, which is RAG and vector and hybrid search and all the rest of it. 2 years from now, it'll be just, table stakes. It'll essentially be what is your quote unquote single store or the contextual store, which simplifies your data estate and hence allows you to scale at millisecond response time with multi-model workloads. That's our premise.
Don't you think like Singlestore is taking like the biggest risk in terms of standardizing how the database is managed for AI workloads in the future, or it's happening now? I was talking to Ali Godse, I think a couple of months back. He mentioned, I think, the Tableau acquisition, which was like the highlight for them in terms of standardizing, building that USB port for enterprise to just plug in and start their AI workload and things like that. Why are you taking this biggest risk of standardizing for the enterprises?
I actually don't think it's a risk at all. I think the risk is, the highest level of respect for Ali and Databricks and what they've built. But what they are talking about is a very analytical application building side of the fence. Right? I do believe that the future will belong to a platform where you can transact with high fidelity and reason with data without moving data, with single-digit millisecond response time at petabyte scale with multimodal workloads. Right? I think the open format war right now, Databricks seems to be ahead. The Tabular acquisition is a pretty good one for them. I do think whether it's Delta Layer or One Lake or Iceberg or Snowflake or Teradata or what have you, these data stores or data marts or what have you, or data repositories are fairly commoditized. It's not a competitive differentiator if you have Delta Lake versus Snowflake versus Google BigQuery. Everyone has that. It is the engine on top of that, the real-time insightful engine on top of that that delivers, I'm repeating, speed at petabyte scale, multimodal workloads. That engine, Databricks doesn't have, Snowflake doesn't have, Google BigQuery doesn't have, right? Our vision, mission, and purpose in life is to speed up your data in your organization, transactional, analytical, and contextual, right, which is vector and hybrid search. And do that, as I said, at millisecond response time, petabyte scale, and multimodal workloads. So our value proposition is actually augmenting Snowflake, augmenting Databricks, not competing with them. At least we don't feel that way. Naturally, as companies become big, they want to have an offering in everything. And if that competition was to come, then we'll report back. But so far, it hasn't come. To build a database, right, is $300 million in a decade. All right, there is no shortcut to it. As I often joke that I could have launched 3 SpaceX shuttles for the amount of money we've spent over the last 12 years building this database, right?
Okay.
So this is not 3 men in a San Mateo or Los Altos garage who will come up tomorrow with a database which is, oh, ooh la la, it's faster, this, that, and the other. And to get it to be enterprise scale, as I said, takes you 10 years. 58% of our revenue comes from Fortune 500 customers, right? So we are battle hardened. We operate at, probably the ultimate scale. 3 of the top 4 banks in America use us as the top 5 databases in their data centers. So we've got these very, very large data customers who use us for applications that give them competitive differentiation in real time, right? And that is a very unique value proposition to Singlestore. So are we taking a risk? Well, the fact really is we are questioning the status quo. We are questioning the fact that the world is not divided into 2 data estates of OLTP and OLAP. The database of the future will be somewhere where you can transact and analyze or reason with data without moving data. And whether it's us or someone else who does it, that will be the future. There is no if, and buts about it. And I know one of the best advice I got was never compare yourself that this is the Uber of this or this is the iPhone of that. However, I mean, you may be too young, but I remember a time where I had a Palm Pilot and I had a BlackBerry and I had a music device and I had, X, Y, and Z. That did get consolidated, all right? And I do think that's exactly what's going to happen in enterprises. Otherwise, it's untenable.
And now on coming to a personal note, right? So you also collaborate with, you said you have like Fortune 500 as your customers, and a lot of them trust you in terms of how they integrate their entire data pipeline and how they work, right? So I just want to know, like, who are some of your like prominent customers that comes to your mind? If there is any India link to it, are there any Indian customers who are currently using Singlestore?
We've got TCL, which uses us, which is a very, very good use case. And the executive there is a very, very dear friend of ours and a big proponent of our technology. HPCL uses us. Indian Oil uses us. Container Corporation of India uses us. And there are a bunch of companies, software companies, Sixth Sense, for example, which is really doing well. Again, two Indian founders, Premal and Viral, and now they have Jason as the CEO. They're based out of California, San Francisco, doing exceptionally well. They are a multi-million-dollar customer for us. We also have very large customers like Dell, which have huge centers in India.
Correct.
Goldman Sachs, huge center in India, in Bangalore actually. And so global customers using India to develop applications on Singlestore, just absolutely massive. We've got approximately 50 plus customers in India.
Got it.
We think that in the next 5 years, India would be the top 5 markets for us from a revenue perspective and the adoption perspective. That's why I'm here after 15 years.
Ashton Kutcher is a good friend of yours. You run the foundation for them. That is also like, I had to dig in a little bit to get that information as well. Apart from the business side and the entrepreneur profit and all of that, there's a philanthropic mission that is inside you and the purpose to drive such initiatives. So could you share something around those lines in terms of getting more women to the workforce? And there are a lot of initiatives that you've been part of, which not many might be aware. So what is that relationship you share with Ashton Kutcher firstly? And then some of your purpose-driven initiatives that aligns with Singlestore as well.
Ashton's just one of the brightest individuals that I've had the pleasure of knowing. Great human being. He probably is no longer associated with Thorn, but he was the founding member of Thorn. And I have a podcast where he talks about that. And what a unbelievable purpose to save the vulnerable, the underserved in society, which are kids, from being sexually exploited. And if you read some of the stats of catfishing and all the rest that happens where, some person pretending to be a 14-year-old boy or girl just catfishes someone, they send the pictures and then they blackmail them and all the rest. And it's a spiral that a lot of teenagers get stuck in, right? It's appalling when you see the suicide rates in female teenagers in the last decade has gone up 300%, all right? And it's not because anything changed, because the most substantial change used to be between 1% and 3%. And it's been the social media and this entire access to information all the time, which is affecting female teenagers a lot more than male. There's a reason for that. I mean, boys demonstrate physical aggression. So you kick the shit out of each other, right? So if you have boys or brothers or what have you, right? And girls, on the other hand, have relational aggression, which means, fear of missing out, who's doing what, body image issues, etc. It's not good or bad. This is what psychologists really talk about. Now, what would happen if you gave boys, right, teenagers, a handgun? They'll shoot the shit out of each other, right? So naturally, the death rate in teenage boys is going to be huge.
Yeah.
The equivalent of a gun in the hands of a teenage boy is a smartphone in the hands of a teenage girl.
Yeah.
Right? And when companies don't demonstrate ethical use of almost AI or predictive analytics, etc., and put profit before the mental health of our kids, that is something which, as a leader, is just unacceptable to me. I don't think it is out of anything except being a human that I find it's my job, it's now, of course, my mission and purpose to save our kids. And that's not that noble to begin with. I mean, I think all of us would want to do that, right? And I just, every opportunity that we get to get involved in a project like that, we do. Go Guardian, another great company that uses us, provides virtual classrooms. And if the kid is getting distracted, the teacher knows. And if they're on websites that they shouldn't be, the teacher knows. And they use our platform. And it's just changed people's lives, especially during COVID, right?
Yeah.
Those are the two that come to mind straight up. I think as long as you're using data to improve the lives of the underserved, underprivileged, and the downtrodden in society. I think that is the biggest promise of AI. It just levels the playing field. Because let me give you an example right now. What is the number one thing that allows someone who's born in poverty to get out of poverty? Education.
Education.
Right? What is the number one hindrance to education? Lack of schools, tutors, right? Now, remember, now every kid can have a personalized tutor through the use of AI.
Yeah.
Imagine what that is going to do to the world in terms of up-leveling these underserved, underprivileged, downtrodden of society to then be on an even keel like, people who have access to money and are of a certain socioeconomic status. That is the more interesting part, all right? The fact that it'll be a $17 trillion productivity enhancement, enterprises would make money. All the rest is, to me, secondary to that cause, all right? If I or Singlestore can be involved in some small way in that effort, that is 1,000 times more interesting to me than anything else that AI does.
And what are some of your risks that you're afraid of with the AI and compared to social media? That is.
I mean, look, social media is something that, is fine. You'll self-regulate. The first part is, remember the internet, you might be too young, but in 1997, 2 years into the internet evolution, what could you do on the internet? Very little. You could send an email, you could, nothing else really. It wasn't interesting.
Okay.
From about 98 to 2003, there were a lot of websites that came up, right?
Okay.
So it became a little interesting. Amazon came up, so you could actually buy books and all the rest. So internet became a bigger part of our lives. You could send email on a mobile phone because internet connectivity was there. And then social media happened. Now, 2 years into the AI evolution, all right, AI is mildly interesting. Siri and, Alexa and this, that, and the other. Okay, it's automation of tasks. It sounds kind of cool when you use it the first time, but over time it just, okay. Over the next 3 to 5 years, there are going to be immersive AI applications that would be built, which are being built right now, which will then incorporate AI more immersively into our lives. And that's where AI will become so much more interesting. So that's where the track of AI is headed. And by the way, if you really saw in 1997 who benefited from the internet wave, they were the infrastructure providers, the Sun, the Cisco's, all the rest, cable providers. Who are benefiting in the AI world right now are the infrastructure, OpenAI, NVIDIA, chip manufacturers, right? And as the applications start building up, the application vendors will then, start taking center stage in terms of value creation. Right? Now, what are the things that we have to be careful about? One is, of course, the regulation bit of it, right? And there are 3 centers of regulation: the US, EMEA, or European Union, and China, right? And by the way, I think, as I've said before, I think there is consensus on the bigger items. None of these 3 want the next World War to be started by machines. No one wants our identity to be stolen by a machine and misused. So on the bigger things, there is almost, a lot of common ground. However, the difference between the manifesto of Europe and that of China, like Brad Smith of Microsoft put it really well, he says it's the difference between Confucius and Aristotle. It's basically, how do you govern society? And I do think that we will have a global regulation kind of sooner than later. And that'll allow for these application development companies to have some sort of guardrails around which they can build, and that's going to be the ethical use of AI. That's one. The second bit, which is extremely important, is the biases in the models that exist.
Okay.
All right. Again, I live in the US. If you were to show AI a picture of a white man or an African American man, the chances that AI is going to say that the African American man is more likely to commit a criminal act is going to be that much higher, because the model that they're using to train it has that bias. How do you unbias the model training is a huge challenge.
Got it.
All right. But there always have been challenges, right? And I do think that the world would be a better place for the reasons I spoke about: education, access to the underserved and the underprivileged, and AI would be a huge leveler. So I'm extremely optimistic about what the world would be with AI being a prominent part of our lives.
One last question. So it's been 15 years. You come back to India. So I'm really sorry. I'm good at asking last questions. So this will be the last.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. So I was saying so your journey, right, last 25 years has been very unconventional compared to what an aspiring Indian would look into, right? So an aspiring Indian, like he'll graduate from college, go abroad for studies, and then get into the Silicon Valley dream and the American dream. So yours has been more on the experiential side and building a lot of these software companies, and then now into a database ecosystem and killing it in the AI ecosystem there. So what would be your advice to all the youngsters who are getting into the AI ecosystem? What would you give it to them? Like, what is a single piece of advice based on all of your experience?
When you look back at your career, right, you always think that a few things were planned, right?
Okay.
However, when you're going through it, you see an opportunity, you like it, you feel it here, it gives you an excitement, you jump at it, you give it your best. Whether you succeed or fail, you still learn, and then you take on the next opportunity and you move on.
Okay.
And that's really what happened in my life. I do think that I was very blessed that I have a set of parents who made education a priority, right? And I graduated in computer science and math major, which set a foundation, which is very good. I literally went to 88 MG Road to Wipro because I'd failed the interview when they came to campus, and almost bullied my way to getting a job selling PCs and printers.
Okay.
And loved it. It was a ego hit when you're thrown out of offices, etc. But it was lovely to see how we were automating offices from typewriters and fax machines and to a really automated thing where you could, you didn't need the white markers and papers, etc. And it was a thrill. It was a real thrill. And then, of course, I've seen probably 3 or 4 such technological evolution, internet, mobility, cloud, and now AI. So the thrill of changing the world for the better, however small it may be, every day is a huge thrill for me. And that's just part of my personality. I went out of India not because of any other which reason. It was just I just wanted to see what was out there in the world. And I do believe that the India of 30 years ago is very different from the India today. And the fact is, what attracted me to the Silicon Valley was you actually literally wake up every morning believing that you will change the world, and you are changing the world in maybe a small way or a big way, but you are. And to me, that is probably the most satisfying. I think a lot of lure of the Silicon Valley are the billionaires and the centimillionaires. It's good. I'm not averse to making money. However, that is probably a distant second or third to being able to live a life where you change civilization as you know it. That thrill to me has been the impetus of probably every decision that I have made, including the one that I'm here at Singlestore. Because you get to live once, and getting into Hinduism, etc. It's going to be 84,000 births before you come back and do this again. So yeah, make the most of it.
That's your AI human, Raj Verma, guys. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.